before KI, third dimension, was developed, or actually before KI was developed, and people would come to work with me, and I would do what a lot of teachers would do, is guide people to rest in as from awareness and have them investigate identity. So just sitting and being. And let's say sometimes it would be first dimension, if you guys follow this language. First dimension teaching or pointing, I would just sit with them and I wouldn't prompt anything up. There's a power in that, actually. It's just being. And noticing what comes up from just being. You're just sitting here. Sometimes we're not even doing inquiry. Even on these group calls, if I'm just sitting here, sometimes just sitting and being and listening can bring stuff up. But the point being is that I learned as a teacher to conjure things up after a while. Because as people would just sit here, a lot of the stuff would just hide. So they were believing things, but they were just hidden under the radar. So I learned to prompt things up. People would come to me then, and I got really good at prompting up what I would feel would be like the core identity. So as I got more skillful as a teacher, I stopped just pointing people to like the surface stuff that doesn't really create most of the suffering. Like, I'm an engineer. Okay, is that what you are? You're just looking and allowing all that. But then we get to core identity. And with core identity in second dimension, we started to pull up the really core thoughts that we buy into our whole life, like, I'm not good enough, I'm a loser, there's something wrong with me, I'm not loved or I'm not lovable, I'm not safe, I'm weak, I'm a victim. And so I spent about 5 years or more honing the craft and teaching other people the craft of self-inquiry, like learning how to conjure up that core identity and help people see that it's just stuff coming and going in awareness and that they are the awareness. It's just like a lot of teachers do, actually. And I did that for 15 years. 15 years. Pointing in the way that other teachers do and not realizing that in my own life and how I was teaching it was encouraging a bypass, because now I understand more about consciousness, or I've seen more, which is, yeah, there's this basic awareness, but it's not just like there's this awareness and then this identity. It's like there's a body here, and the body contains the unconscious programming that acts as the root of that identity. It's not really, a good metaphor is a simple one, is if you went to a garden and you saw weeds pop up. If you sat there and pulled the weeds for years, the weeds would just keep coming because the root under the ground keeps producing them. It's exactly what I was doing. It's like I'm the teacher, just like most teachers, and people come to me and here comes the root or the weed out of the ground, the story. And I'll show them, see how that's just something appearing in you, including the emotions of it. So it wasn't just the thought or the thoughts, it was the feeling of being deficient and lacking. You just sit there and allow it, and then just from being and allowing it, it's like the weed would go away. The weed being the story or the identity. At least it would go away temporarily, because during the time that I was sitting with them, they were recognizing their true nature and seeing from that. So at least during the time I was with them, there would be the clear seeing that they're not that, or that even if that story came through, it's like it didn't hook in. See, they could just sit there with me and see, no matter how many times a story came up, it's not me, and I can allow it. But all the time that I was doing that, with each person that I was working with, each person had been storing emotion their whole life. I didn't understand that that's why the ego was there, from the buried emotion. So by encouraging people just to look at identity, but not to bring it to the body fully from the beginning, I was helping them store anger and sadness. I didn't know it, but because of how I was pointing them to identity, they were already storing anger, basically. They were already storing sadness, and I wasn't introducing anything in that to help them get to that. I was just actually pointing them to the identity on the surface of that. I was pointing them to the weed over and over again. And then they would sit with me and the weeds would kind of dissolve. The problem, though, is that the repression and the trauma was under the ground. And so when they would leave the session, see, they didn't have a history with me. So it's not like I'm not really going to be able to trigger them very well. It's all pretty safe, really. And so then they get up and they go live their life around the people that can trigger them. And then guess what comes up? The identity again, the triggers. In part because the repression and the trauma that produces it was missed in the pointing. So they come back. And I do the same thing. Let's look. Let's see who you are. We look and we watch, we feel. Same thing. Oh yeah, I see this. I guess I can, this is so obvious that I'm the awareness. And then we go do the same thing. Go be around your family, get triggered because the trauma was missed, come back. Ad infinitum, like that just kept going on. And it goes on a lot, like everywhere. And apparently we're having trouble catching on to this. But what's really going on, if you want to think about it differently, is when you were a kid, you couldn't be yourself. I've not yet met a human being who could actually just be themselves when they were a kid. So it seems to me that we're all in this boat, that none of us could really be and feel and allow everything as we were kids. So there's no way that we can be ourselves in this lifetime with that going on. With the bearing of emotion, we had to develop unconsciously a false identity to survive all of that. That's going to be with us until we get to the root, the reason that that got formed. So the reason that it got formed is because I couldn't feel and allow emotions, certain emotions. Therefore, it had to form to protect me. So in my adult life, if I just look at the thing that's there to protect me, I don't look at the thing that creates it, I'm bypassing. So remember how we see it in KI. The identity that's formed in childhood is simply there to protect you from feeling stuff. So if you just look at the identity, you still have this stuff. A lot of us still have that stuff in our bodies. And now a lot of us are walking around in, or have been walking around in what we would say is like an initial awakening, where we have some sense of the presence, but the roots under the ground are still there. So you can actually put to rest a lot of identity by just being in awareness, and then keep storing anger and sadness, and then that's what can turn into a disease or chronic pain or worse later. So it's not just like a novel thing. Like, oh, wow, we missed something. We should go back and check it out. No, we missed something, and this stuff is contributing to serious health issues. So I think it's important to talk about dissolving identity without bypassing. The way that we're doing it in KI, one way that we're doing it is that when the identity appears for us, we're not just dealing with the surface. So we're not just looking to see, who am I? When we get triggered, we want to go, or when we believe those things, we want to go deeper into what's the mechanism there that's producing that in that moment. That identity isn't happening in a vacuum. It doesn't just happen. It's happening for a reason, and there are utilities with it, and those are the reasons. And generally, the utilities for our deficiency story are just like I said. It's we identify with that and repress the emotion to stay safe and get love, meaning that's how we survived childhood. We got love and we stayed safe with our parents or whoever else by bearing what was real for us and identifying with what is not. And so now we can't just look at what is not real for us. We have to go back to what we buried. We can't just look at the false identity. We have to look at what is real for us. what is my real experience like? Now we're unpacking, in a sense, is like, what would it have been like to have conscious parents, in a way? Like, what would it be like to be a human being on this earth who didn't have to survive by doing that, right? What would that be like? Because we can't have that freedom, is what I've learned. You can't have that real freedom by just questioning the thing that protects you. You have to go for the thing that you're protecting yourself from for that deeper freedom. And it's quite a lot like, the feeling of it is, for me, is like, this is what it would have been like to have conscious parents. The emotional experience of this part of the awakening is like that, because there's a sense of, I can be myself, not the presence. The presence has been there for 15 years. That's just there. But what I'm talking about is the embodiment of it, so that there's flow. So when we look at identity from the ground up, from the body up, we can experience flow. We don't just experience freedom or peace, we are feeling and expressing the full range of a human emotion. So there's flow. In other words, energy is flowing. We're not stuck in certain areas in our life, in our relationship, when we look at identity from the somatic up. Because what we've learned with this repression, okay, let me just say this. I'd like to propose a different way of looking at identity here, which is because I think, like, when I was having people look at identity, it was in a safe space. It was like, okay, let's just look. Your mom and dad aren't here. Your wife aren't here. We're not going to bring them up. Who are you? Oh, well, I'm the space. If you're not going to bring any of them up, I can eventually see that I'm this. But then the problem is that you get up or out of that session, now your actual life is not that. Just some satsang space, you know. Your actual life is relationship. So when you get up off the investigation, your actual life comes in, and that's how self was formed when you were a kid, right? Through relationship. You didn't come to think of yourself as not good enough, as if you're an island over here. You did it in relationship to all the people. So we should be investigating self within the context of relationship as adults, because that's how it was formed. So dissolving identity in KI would be including how it was formed, bringing in relationship, and then letting that show us how we're holding on to emotion in the body, taking us straight to the repression, which then shows us that the repression creates the identity. It's like inside out. So strangely, people do a lot of somatic work here, and the identity starts to go away. Not by looking at the identity, really. I mean, yeah, you can do processing of the identity, but remember, the identity comes because of the repression. So you process the repression, the identity, because it's there to protect you. It doesn't have to protect you anymore, because you're feeling and expressing more of the full range of your experience. Does that happen overnight? No. No. And that's also like a public awareness issue, because with the non-dual thing, the whole promise is, it's all here. You're already awake. There's nothing to get. There's nothing to see. All that. So that's the basis of this, is presence. All the work is done, and life happens within presence. So you can't really avoid that piece of it. It's all presence. And we point to presence. But this is a process, because what I've learned through the years is, like, our system doesn't, and you wouldn't even want, I don't think, to release all your repression at one time. At first, I didn't understand why it was doing that. Why is this a process? Why is it taking me a while to reverse the repression? Until I realized that, like, there's a lot of energy in this. It's all stored. And when I look back at the whole healing process of my spinal condition, if all that energy would have been released in one sitting, actually, I can't even imagine what that would be like. It would have been overwhelming, at least. Maybe it would have taken me to the asylum. I don't know. But I'm grateful that my nervous system did it differently. Like, that it's like, okay, we're going to look at some today. Now we're going to go do something else. And then there's some relief from that. And then as I did that regular practice over time, the repression was reversed. So we have to get out of the headspace, some of the headspace of, like, you can't be in a process, or has nothing to do with an unfolding, or, you know, I'm not talking about seeking, by the way, because seeking is a different movement. It comes from the repression, in my view, trying to get away from something. This is an unfolding. As you process the layers and the conditioning, there's just a deepening that happens. It's really hard to describe, though, because it doesn't feel like we're getting anywhere. If you start to really recognize presence as the foundation, it doesn't really feel like you're getting somewhere, like in time, but the deepening is unmistakable. I'm going to leave you with this. This feels right to do this. I said this in a video earlier. What does like dissolving identity without bypassing look and feel like? I know what dissolving identity embody that looks like a bypass. That looks like me getting really sick, actually. But what does the dissolving the identity look like without the bypass? The best, in my view, so far, exposition of that is Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth, at the end. Although he doesn't provide the pathway, in the whole book he talks about the pain body, and I think the pain body is his equivalent of the repression and the trauma. And if he provides a pathway, it's just being. So he basically says it's just being here. Eventually this realization turns into flow, enthusiasm, like, but through the years, for most people it didn't actually. So what they were actually experiencing was what he calls acceptance. So he talks about 3 vibrations. They're just concepts, but like he would say the baseline is acceptance. So in other words, when you recognize presence, there's a sense of acceptance because you can see like there's a story here, but I just do nothing with it and allow it, or a feeling. And then just that, see that acceptance of everything, just being and allowing, accepting. But that's just baseline. And some people will be like, well, I'd love to have that baseline of this acceptance, but you know, he's just talking about something here, the recognition. At a very baseline, we have acceptance. And then above that, I don't know how much detail he goes into, but I would think he would say is that as we transmute the pain body, we might feel something more than that, like we're in flow, or we're not just in acceptance, we're embodying the realization. And what I like to add into this whole thing is that when you dissolve identity without bypassing, you're dealing with the stuckness in your body, the pain body. What I love about this is that the thing that outside and the inside are one isn't a metaphor. It's quite literal, that when there's stuckness in the body, there's stuckness in your life. So by using relationship and seeing the stuckness in your life, all of that becomes a pointer to the stuckness in your body. Remember how I said that the satsang here is life. It's relationship, and all relationship is included in the investigation of who am I. So part of the investigation is when you bring in relationship, is that you're going to feel stuff, right? And there's going to be repression and trauma there. But because you're bringing in relationship and we're teaching you a higher skill level, you're going to be transmuting the stuckness that shows up with the identity. So it's very somatic approach. And as you transmute the stuckness, then, well, my experience with that is that when you feel the energy flow in your body, and energy isn't just getting stuck, like throat, head, heart, stomach, chronic pain, there's a corresponding flow in your life. And that's the enthusiasm and inspiration, where you're now embodying that. You're not just looking at a heady way or just the head awakening, but embodied, where the stuckness is then transmuted. That's what I think is actually the indicator of dissolving identity without bypassing. It's not being able to sit here and say to people, there's no self. Or it's not showing up peacefully, because you could have peace without embodying it. Because remember the baseline acceptance. Everything just is. The markers here would be energetic. So if there's not flow, for example, in your life, if there's inertia is the word that I use when we have a lot of repression and we can't move. Even if we feel free of some of our conditioning, the body keeping the score just keeps us Like I can't get off the couch, or I can't write music. I can't put the website up. I can't apply for a job. Just inertia. See, because one of the markers for dissolving identity without bypassing is that the inertia isn't there. So if there's inertia and you're in a non-dual path, you might want to go look at repression. Because, again, you can question identity, and a lot of people do it up here, leaving a lot of that in the body. And then they wake up. This is a strange phenomenon. You actually can wake up without going to the trauma or the pain body. But then you've got the awakeness with inertia. Or, in my case, you have an awakeness with addiction, awakeness with chronic pain. So you definitely want to dissolve identity all the way down, because that's how it runs. It runs all the way down. And in fact, the roots of it are in the body. I hope this helps. If you're interested, come to the members area or go on YouTube and just watch some videos. I've done some videos since like December of 2022 where I just lay out this path as best I can. But the real 3D work is in the members area. The work that's transmuting this energy better than anything I've seen before. See you all.